pack your things and get out of my house. I don't want to see your face here ever again." Those were the exact words my stepmother said to me on a Tuesday evening in February. I was 16 years old, standing in the hallway of the only home I'd known since my mother died, holding a half-eaten piece of toast because I'd come downstairs for a snack and somehow walked into the worst moment of my life. I didn't even know what I had done yet. That part came later. My mother passed away from ovarian cancer when I was 11. It wasn't sudden. We had about 14 months from diagnosis to the end, which sounds like enough time to prepare, but isn't. Not when you're 11. Not when the person dying is the one who braids your hair every morning and knows exactly how you take your hot chocolate and calls you little bean even though you've asked her to stop because it's embarrassing. After she died, it was just my father and me in our house in Barrie, Ontario. For almost 2 years, it was just us. He wasn't the perfect father. He worked too much. He didn't always know what to say. He burned dinner more often than not. But he tried. I could see him trying. That counted for something. Then he met Lynette. Lynette came with a daughter, my stepsister, Gwen, who was 4 years older than me and had the kind of quiet confidence that made people want to please her. Teachers liked her. Neighbors liked her. My father liked her immediately. In that way adults sometimes attach to other people's children. A fresh start, no complicated history, no grief to navigate. Gwen never said anything openly cruel to me. That was the thing. If she had, I might have been able to point to it, name it, bring it to my father. Instead, she worked in small ways. A story slightly shifted, a detail added that hadn't been there, a look exchanged with Lynette when my father's back was turned. She built a version of me over months and years, careless, unstable, not quite trustworthy, and she built it so slowly that I didn't realize it was happening until the structure was already complete. By the time I was 15, I had learned to be quiet in my own home. By 16, I had learned to make myself small. The thing Gwen told them, the lie that ended everything, was that I had stolen money from Lynette's purse. $300, cash. Lynette had been saving it for a car repair. It went missing on a Thursday. By Saturday, Gwen had quietly mentioned to my father that she'd seen me near Lynette's bag earlier in the week. She said it with a small frown, like she hated having to say it at all, like it hurt her. My father asked me about it. I told him the truth. I hadn't touched anything. I hadn't even been in the bedroom. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see something shifting behind his eyes. Not quite belief, not quite doubt, but the beginning of a question he'd been quietly asking himself for years. About me, about whether I was the person Lynette and Gwen had been gently suggesting I was. I didn't know that question had been growing. I only felt the result of it. That Tuesday evening, when Lynette told me to pack my things and get out, my father was standing behind her. He didn't say a word. He just stood there with his arms crossed and his eyes somewhere past my left shoulder, looking at the wall like it held something more bearable than my face. I said, "Dad," just that one word. He didn't answer. I went upstairs. I put what I could fit into my backpack. Clothes, my mother's old journal that I kept in the back of my closet, my phone charger, my student card. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I think I was still waiting for someone to come upstairs and tell me it was a mistake. Nobody came. I walked out the front door at 7:40 in the evening. It was minus 18 degrees. February in Barrie. The wind off Kempenfeld Bay cuts through everything. Doesn't matter how many layers you have on. I had a winter jacket, a hat, one glove. I couldn't find the other one and nowhere to go. I walked for a while without really knowing where I was going. I thought about my friend Thompson's house, but her parents barely had room for their own family, and I was too ashamed to knock on the door and explain what had happened. I thought about the library, but it was closed. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't know who. There's a particular kind of cold that stops feeling like cold after a while. That's what the health teacher had warned us about once during a winter safety unit in grade 9. She said that was the dangerous part. When you stop shivering, when it almost starts to feel okay, that's when hypothermia is actually taking hold. I remember that warning somewhere around the 40-minute mark, when I realized I was no longer feeling my feet properly and I wasn't shivering anymore, and I thought, oh, this is what she meant. I sat down on a bench outside a Tim Hortons that was closed for renovations. I didn't mean to sit for long. I just needed a minute. I don't remember closing my eyes. What I remember next is a voice and warmth and a car seat under my back. The woman who found me was named Irene. She was 63 years old, retired from the school board, and she'd been coming back from her book club when she saw me on the bench. She told me later that she almost drove past, that she'd slowed down, talked herself out of it, and then pulled a U-turn because something wouldn't let her keep going. She drove me to the Royal Victoria Regional Health Centre. She sat in the waiting room for 4 hours. I didn't even know her last name yet. When I woke up properly, she was still there. She had a paper cup of tea from the vending machine, and she was doing a crossword puzzle from a small book she'd pulled from her coat pocket. She looked up when she heard me stir and said simply, "Good. You're back." The nurses told me I had mild to moderate hypothermia. Another hour outside and the conversation might have gone differently. A social worker came and sat with me the next morning. A calm woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead who didn't make me feel like a case file. She listened to what had happened without writing it down first. Then she started writing. I told them about my father, about Lynette, about the money I hadn't taken. I didn't know yet what was going to happen next. Irene asked if I had any family other than my father. I had my mother's mother. My grandmother lived in Sudbury, about 90 minutes north. We hadn't spoken much since my mother died. Not because of any falling out, just the slow drift of grief, of distance, of not knowing how to reach across the space that loss leaves. I had her phone number memorized. My mother had made me memorize it when I was small, the way she made me memorize our address and the emergency number. Just in case, she'd said. Her name was Frances. The social worker called her. My grandmother drove down the same day. She walked into that hospital room, took one look at me, and sat down on the edge of the bed and took both my hands in hers. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just held my hands, and her hands were warm, and that was enough. "You're coming home with me," she said. It wasn't a question. Living with my grandmother was not what I expected. It was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. She had a small house near a lake, and she made oatmeal every morning, and she went to bed at 9:30, and she asked me how I was doing every single day. Not like a pleasantry, but like a real question she wanted a real answer to. I finished high school in Sudbury. I made friends. Not many, but real ones. I got a part-time job at a bakery and saved money and applied to Laurentian University. I studied social work, partly because of what happened to me and partly because of the calm woman with the reading glasses who had sat with me in the hospital and listened before she wrote anything down. I wanted to be that person for someone else someday. The money thing? The $300, I had put it behind me? Or I thought I had. What I hadn't known, and what came out 4 years later, was that Gwen had taken the money herself. I found out the way a lot of things come out eventually, not through justice or investigation, but through a fracture between people who were never as solid as they seemed. Gwen and Lynette had a falling out the summer I was 20. I only heard about it secondhand through my father's younger brother, my uncle, who had never particularly liked Lynette, who called me out of the blue one November afternoon while I was studying for an exam. He said that Gwen had finally told Lynette the truth about the money in the middle of an argument about something else entirely, that Gwen had taken it to pay back a friend she owed, had panicked about being caught, and had pointed the blame at me because she knew my father was already half convinced I was trouble. That it had taken her 4 years to say it out loud, and she'd only said it as a weapon in a fight, not as a confession. My uncle told me my father had been in the room when Lynette told him. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after we hung up. I want to tell you that my first feeling was something clean and simple. Relief, maybe. Or satisfaction. The truth finally out, the record corrected after all these years. But the first thing I actually felt was tired. Just tired. Because the truth being known doesn't undo the Tuesday in February. It doesn't give back the hypothermia or the hospital bed or the 4 years of quietly rebuilding myself in a city that wasn't originally mine. The truth being known is not the same as the truth having mattered when it counted. My father called me 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message once. He said he was sorry, that he hadn't known, that he should have believed me. His voice broke once, near the end, and I sat with that broken moment for a long time because part of me had spent years wanting exactly that, to hear him realize, and now that it was here, it just felt like evidence of how much had already been lost. I called him back a week later. I wasn't ready to have the conversation, but I also knew that waiting for ready can become its own way of never doing anything. We talked for almost an hour. I told him what that night had been like. I told him about sitting on the bench, about the cold, about Irene in the hospital and the social worker. I told him about my grandmother driving down from Sudbury on the same day she got the call because she didn't even hesitate. I told him all of it, not to punish him, but because I needed him to know what his silence in that hallway had actually cost. He listened. He didn't make excuses. That was the thing I'd been braced for. The excuses, the explanations, the reframing, and it didn't come. He just listened and said, near the end, "I failed you. I know that." I said, "You did." And then I said, "I need more time before I know what that means for us." He said he understood. Gwen was charged. That came about 2 months later, after Lynette, furious and apparently unbothered by the irony, filed a complaint with the police. Gwen was charged with theft under $5,000 and mischief. She pleaded guilty to the theft charge. The sentence was a conditional discharge with 18 months of probation and a restitution order. The restitution wasn't to me, it was to Lynette for the $300. Nobody ever officially restituted me anything. Not the 4 years. Not the February. Not the bench outside the closed Tim Hortons. My lawyer, I had a lawyer by then, a woman who had helped me understand what options I had, told me I could pursue a civil action. I sat with that for a while and decided against it. Not because Gwen didn't deserve it, not because the harm hadn't been real, but because continuing to direct my energy toward her was a choice I no longer wanted to make. I had a life by then, a real one. An apartment in Sudbury with a plant that I'd kept alive for 2 years. A practicum placement at a family services organization where I got to sit with people in difficult moments and just listen before I wrote anything down. Friends who knew my history without looking at me like I was made of it. I didn't want to trade any of that attention for Gwen. My grandmother died 2 years ago. It wasn't unexpected. She'd been declining for a while, but it undid me in a way I hadn't prepared for. She was 81. She had kept her house near the lake until the very end. I was with her. She had given me back the habit of feeling safe somewhere. I don't think I had fully understood what I'd lost when my mother died. That particular safety, that specific sense of being in a place where you are simply wanted. Until Frances rebuilt it so quietly and steadily. Over the years I lived with her that I didn't notice it happening until it was just there. Like good health. You only think about it when it's gone. I've thought a lot about Irene too, the woman who pulled a U-turn. We stayed in touch for a while after the hospital. She sent me a card when I graduated high school, and I brought her a small gift from the bakery where I worked, and we had lunch once at a place near her apartment. Then life moved the way it does, and we lost the thread. But I think about her more than she knows. I think about the specific decision she made. The U-turn after she'd already told herself to keep going. And I think it's one of the most important things anyone has ever done for me, and she didn't even know me yet. I'm 31 now. I work full-time at a family resource center in Sudbury. I have a small caseload of clients, Most of them young people in complicated family situations, some of them not entirely unlike the situation I was in at 16. I am careful not to project my story onto theirs. Every person's situation is its own shape, but sometimes a kid will say something about not being believed, about being made to feel like the problem, about the specific loneliness of being dismissed by the people who were supposed to be paying attention, and I know that loneliness. I know it exactly. My father and I are in contact. It's not what it was. But then, what it was wasn't all that safe to begin with, even before that February. We talk every month or so. He's in his 60s now. He and Lynette separated. He lives alone in a smaller place outside Barrie. Sometimes we have conversations that feel almost normal, and I let myself enjoy them without trying to make them mean more than they do. I don't call him dad out loud anymore. Not because it's a statement I decided to make, but because the word just stopped feeling natural somewhere along the way, and I've never forced it back. Some things, when they stop fitting, just stop. If I could go back to the girl sitting on that bench in February, her one glove, her mother's journal in her backpack, her feet going numb, I don't think I'd tell her that everything turns out fine. That framing has always bothered me. It suggests the suffering was just the difficult first chapter of a story with a predetermined happy ending, and it wasn't. The suffering was real, and it had costs that don't disappear, and the girl on that bench was not wrong to be afraid. What I tell her is this: someone is going to pull a U-turn. You don't know her yet. You don't know her name or what she looks like, or that she'll be coming back from a book club and almost drive past and then not. You can't know that. But she exists. She's already on the road. Just stay on the bench a little longer. I lost a father who should have stayed, and I found a grandmother who made sure I never felt that loss alone. That's not a trade I would have chosen, but it's the life that came out of the worst night I've ever had, and I've decided to stop being sorry about how good it turned out to be.